Hello, everyone. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. The Hey Chaplain podcast is the place where members of the law enforcement community can share their wisdom and experience through me, the chaplain, to encourage others who wear the badge. In this second half of the Kansas City Mafia interview, you don't want to miss Gary Jenkins zeroing in on the Kansas City Mafia family, the Civella family. He explains the rise and fall of the Civellas and how both the Mafia and law enforcement evolved in the decades after World War II. We'll talk about unions, casinos, and wiretaps, and Gary will tell us a little bit about his own career. You especially don't want to miss Gary's advice about what to do after you retire from law enforcement. Today we pick up with where Gary and I were talking about the history of gambling as a major revenue stream for organized crime here in Kansas City, when he then focused in on the Kansas City Mafia crime family, the Civella family. Here is Gary Jenkins.
Now, gambling, when football got going, professional football got going, then gambling became the source of income for our family. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
There's just so much money that's gambled on professional football. By the 70s, that's when Nick Civella, who became the boss, so we ought to talk about him.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when did the Civellas become synonymous with the Kansas City Mafia? I mean, where did they enter the picture? Was that during Prohibition, or was that later?
Well, Nick and Cork, his brother Cork Civella, were young guys during Prohibition. Nick was always kind of, he was the brains of the two.
Okay.
Nick was Carl Cork was the brawn and had a temper like you can't believe it. That's why they called him Cork, because he'd blow his cork all the time.
Right.
So they say it's not Corky, it's Cork.
Okay.
But Nick was the brains.
Okay.
But Nick was always kind of a rebel. He was robbing protected gambling games in the city during the 30s and the 40s and into the war. He had a little gang that stole tires. Tires was a big one to steal back in the day. And so he got on the outs with, I think it was Jim Ballesteri was the guy's name. He gets on the outs. He has to go off to Chicago. They killed one of his partners in his gang and try to kill him. Matter of fact, he's sitting in his car at a liquor store over here on Truman Road, about Truman and west of Troost a little bit.
And who's trying to kill him?
This Jim Ballesteri.
Oh, okay.
He had been robbing these protected games.
Okay.
You know, you got a game out here, and it's you're connected to the mob, then nobody better go rob it.
Right.
And so Nick had this little gang, and he was going around robbing these protected games. And so they found out who it was.
Fire.
Yeah, it's like playing with fire. And he's sitting in this car, and the deputy sheriff gets in the car with him, Jackson County deputy. Now, remember, the county police is always a little bit, and actually our city police all the way up to after the war up into the 50s, it was a little bit shaky. We had people that were
a lot of corruption
out of the old school, out of the old days.
Yeah. And
so this deputy sheriff gets in the car with him, and Nick just slides over, and the guy's sitting behind the wheel, and they're talking, and a car comes flying in, and they get out. Two guys get out, one with a real deal machine gun, and the other with the shotgun. They just start blasting that car, and they kill the deputy.
Oh, my.
Nick rolls out because he's on the other side away from the car because they think the driver is Nick.
He's driving.
Right. He rolls out and runs off and gets away. He goes to Chicago, and they say that's why he had really good relationships with Chicago all of his life because he gets protected in Chicago, and he stays in Chicago for several years, and then he comes back. They broker some kind of a deal, and he comes back. He must have done something up there. We don't know what, but he was valuable up there to somebody because they broker a deal and they bring him back. He's able to come back, and we have a new boss, and a guy named Tony Gizzo. Johnny Lazia got killed in 1934. And there was a couple other kind of bosses in between during the 30s, and this guy named Tony Gizzo is the boss, and they bring Nick back, and he becomes Tony Gizzo's driver, which is a pretty important place to be. You're right next to the boss all the time.
Right.
That's a primo spot to be, as the boss's driver.
Huh.
So Nick comes back, and he's the boss's driver, and that's the start of his career. After he comes back from Chicago, he had this interrupted mob career or career as a criminal in Kansas City. Goes to Chicago. We don't know much about what happened. He did get in a shooting. He was part of a little crew that tried to rob a dance they'd have a dance and take in a lot of cash. So he tried to rob the box office of a dance. Got in a shootout. He shot a Chicago policeman. What's funny is they didn't do anything up there. You think Kansas City's bad, corruption-wise. They don't hold a candle. We don't hold a candle in Chicago.
Nick Civella comes back to Kansas City approximately when?
I'd say 49, 50.
Okay. So
after
late
the
40s.
War. Yeah, late 40s after the war.
Well, let's talk about, post-war years. So Nick Civella is the boss in Kansas City.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Right.
Okay. And gambling is a big deal.
Gambling is
in
a thing.
Kansas City. Certainly lots of other illicit activities. How does that evolve then through the 50s, 60s, 70s? And where do you come into the picture as an officer?
In 1957, there's the famous mob convention at Appalachian, New York. So they have this big meeting of all the heads of the families in all the United States. Mm-hmm. And guess who is at the train station on their way to Appalachian at that same time, and then it's picked up by the upstate New York police? Nick Civella and Joe Filardo, who ran Roma Bakery. If you guys go out there and buy any Roma bread, just remember that comes from Joe Filardo.
That's mafia bread.
That's mafia bread. I don't know who owns it now, but we don't want to get in any trouble here. I don't think the mafia owns it now.
Conglomerate of businesses or whatever. Sure, yeah.
But he is there to introduce Nick to the national bosses as this is the man in Kansas City. He is the guy. And Nick Civella is canny. He's good. He reads a lot. He is thoughtful. He never was a guy to go out in the clubs and party around and quiet. But he's all business. I'll tell you that. And so, he's consolidating the gambling's going on and the other different vices, the things that fell off the truck. But Nick, he understands that this out-and-out crime, kind of losing the political element, or the politics has changed during the 60s especially. Had huge upheaval in the 60s in politics. And so the old school politicians are going out and new brooms come in and sweep clean, and the newspapers are paying more attention to that connection between organized crime and politicians, and a lot more heat on that, and that's kind of going out. Nick Civella sees in Kansas City there's an option with union activity. Union activity is almost as good as owning a bunch of politicians. And it's really interesting how he meets the guy who ends up being the head of all the Teamsters unions in Kansas City, all the different locals, who then is really the last international president for a real short period of time before the government really came down on the Teamsters in the 70s. Mm-hmm. He meets Roy Lee Williams, it was the man's name. He meets him, and Nick Civella and Roy Lee Williams are sitting on a local Jackson County Democratic Party committee, and it's the committee that chooses who is going to run, who the party in Jackson County is going to support. Yeah, because you got to, there's like a few hoops. You can throw your hat in the ring, but if you want to get elected, you've got to have
their endorsement.
You got to have their endorsement. He's sitting on this committee, and they get to know each other, and they start saying they have some mutual interest, and Hoffa's already started this on a national level, kind of this unholy connection with the mafia, because the mafia can go in and they're happy to use intimidation tactics for the unions. They're happy to go in and do vandalism whenever they've got somebody tries to hire a bunch of scabs and don't worry about a strike. Why, they get hold of their mafia buddies and they'll go in and do a bunch of vandalism. They don't mind. They've got people that'll do it. They've got people who don't mind going to jail. Hoffa thinks he can control this beast of the mafia, and found out in the end he couldn't. But and so on a local basis in Kansas City, Roy Lee Williams becomes Civella's buddy, and Civellas owns him in a short period of time. We don't know exactly how, but he probably, as this one mob guy read his book that he wrote, and he had some money coming from him for settling a strike.
Huh. Okay.
A mob guy can go in and settle a strike. They'll go in. If you've got some people, maybe you got some rank and file that don't want to go ahead and settle, mob guys will go out there
They'll lean on them.
They'll go out and lean on them. Or if you've got a company that's being hard case, they'll go lean on the company. They can settle a strike.
Yeah.
That's what the original mafia was about, was settling disputes over in Sicily between people.
So somehow Roy Lee Williams
he formed an unholy alliance with Nick Civella. Right.
Okay.
And he found out that he got a tiger by the tail. He tells a story. He ends up turning state's witness or federal witness and testifies just before he dies, late in his life. He's looking at a 50-year sentence for trying to help bribe a Nevada senator. He's part of a conspiracy with some Chicago people to bribe Howard Cannon, who was a Nevada senator, about some gambling things out in Las Vegas, because the Teamsters end up totally wrapped up in that Las Vegas thing.
Sure.
He tells this story after he starts talking to the government. And Bill Owsley, a local FBI agent that's my friend and was a case agent on the Las Vegas skimming trial, told me this story. He said that Nick Civella came up with an idea. I think it was to get Teamsters to all buy into some kind of a health program or maybe a dental program, I think. And then when Williams looked at it, he said, and Nick Civella was going to get like $1 out of each one of these guys that signed up. Nick Civella was going to get $1 for doing nothing.
Right.
Just telling him, this is, I've got these dentists lined up, and talk to this guy, and he'll deal with you, and you'll have this dental program. But he was going to get $1 out of it. And Williams told him, he said, well, I can't do that. I can't, that's not good for my employees here. Somebody stops by his house one day and picks him up and says, come on with us, takes him for a ride out to, like a house or an apartment or something, sets him down, puts a lamp right in his eyes, and Nick Civella comes out of the dark and then starts telling him, if it was up to me, you wouldn't leave this room alive. I think we can work this out, but, you got to understand. Reads him the riot act. And what's interesting about that, Jared, is 25 or 30 years later, we got another guy from out in Las Vegas who tells exactly the same story, and he can't know this other story.
Right. So is that just a Civella move?
It was a Civella move there. I think you saw that one of those old B movies where the detectives get them in and shine a light in their eyes and give them the third degree, as we used to say.
He's got a stick. Yeah. How interesting. And so the mafia in Kansas City have all kinds of connections then to casinos out in Las Vegas. Right. When did you start your law enforcement career?
1971.
1971. Okay. And then when did you become a detective or start, when did the mafia get onto your radar personally?
I think I was always kind of interested in it. I remember reading the Peter Moss book about Joe Valachi, and there was another famous mob informant from New Jersey that they wrote a book. I always was interested in that. Sure. And came on the police department, do my time in patrol, as we all do. Some people don't mind staying patrol. I wanted to be a detective, of course. And we had some station detectives, and I pretty quickly, within a couple of years, became a station detective and worked burglaries and larcenies. But I found out about this thing called the intelligence unit, and I thought, that sounds interesting, and they worked the mafia. I stumbled across a little information and fed them that, and it was pretty good. It was more about a black organized crime thing, and found out a little more and fed them that,
Kind of proving your worth.
Earning my bones, making my bones, as they say. I didn't have to kill anybody, but I had to show them that I could do something.
Right.
Found out some more information, even got assigned to a little special squad down there on this kind of a black organized group of bank robbers, and who was led by a local guy who had a lot of political connections. And nothing really ever came of it, but I really got to know them pretty well then. Mm-hmm. And then a few years later, they have an opening, and they remembered me, and they knew my hat was always in the ring because I'd kept up my connections with the sergeants down there. And so I get down there, and I go to work on the mafia.
How many years did you do that?
So I spent about 14 years altogether, I think, 13, 14 years in the intelligence unit.
Excellent. And during that time, we're up in the 70s and 80s and beyond, what's happening with the Civella family, the Kansas City Mafia? They've they've been caught now a couple times with Las Vegas connections
Right.
and that kind of thing. So tell me, how are they beginning their decline?
Well, it was both my movies, Gangland Wire and Brothers Against Brothers, the Civella Spiro War, will tell you about the rise and the fall of the Mafia in Kansas City, and I was part of it. I came in 76, and sometime during 76, we had a mob war going on. Mm-hmm. And informants were telling the Bureau that these guys would sit over at the Villa Capri, which is a little pizza nightclub, neighborhood bar over at Independence and Prospect, and said they would always sit at the same table, and they'd have what we would call dirty talk. They had an informant who said, yeah, they told me about doing this, or wanted me to go put a bomb on this guy's car, and we talk about maybe fencing some property and different kind of discussion of illegal activities. Mm-hmm. And we also, in intelligence unit, we do things like drive by those places and write down license numbers. We go into them once in a while and just go in there and eat, or just sit at the bar and drink for a little bit and see who was in there. And we had done that, and we wrote reports when that happens. And so, we'd been in and out of that place, written reports, and they've got informants saying, yeah, they always sit at the same place, and we'd seen them sit at that same place, and they have this kind of talk, and they put a hidden microphone there. Uh-huh. And so but they don't pick up talk about going killing one of these Spiro brothers. There's 4 brothers that were in this war with the Civella brothers and the rest of the Civella family. These were like upstarts, young Turks that wanted a bigger piece of the action. And they'd killed the older brother off a couple, 3 years before that, and the youngest brother was a real mover and a shaker and a professional criminal, and he'd gotten out of the penitentiary by then, and he'd started making some moves, and he had told people that he was going to make moves on this Civella family. And so they don't hear him talking about anything about the Spiros or any murders. They hear him talking about Las Vegas and mention $25 million. Are we in on that with them? And what Lefty, you remember you were out at the Stardust, and Jay Brown said this, and this guy called the Genius said that, and when they start running that down, they find out they're talking about the Stardust in Las Vegas, and they're talking about Lefty Rosenthal, who was a Robert De Niro character. They're talking Jay Brown was a lawyer, and who was a corporate counsel, I think, and partner of Oscar Goodman, who was a big mob lawyer in Las Vegas. And, long story short, they threw up a whole bunch of wiretaps because we followed the underboss, Tuffy DeLuna, around and caught him on some payphones over in the Breckenridge Inn at I-435 in front. Threw a wire on those payphones, and there's a guy in Las Vegas really laying it out. They talk about going to the place called the Squares, and it's in the afternoon. So we catch him down at a law office, and Quinn, who had been Civella's lawyer on several different things, so he just let Nick Civella come in every afternoon and use his office if he wasn't going to be there. So then you follow him down there, and then they throw a microphone in there and a wiretap on that phone. They think they're really cool in that lawyer's office, and they're really some good talk out of that one. So you put that together, and you come up with all these influences in Las Vegas, and that they're getting skim money coming back from Las Vegas, and they're joined up with Milwaukee and Cleveland, and Chicago mobs.
Skim money is when the casino brings in the money before it's counted. They're stealing some. So when they report to the state to pay their taxes, that the mob's already taken their cut before it ever got counted. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
They even had one deal when they'd weigh the coins, they rigged the scale so it would misweigh the coins. But that was too much trouble because then you had to convert those coins into cash because you didn't want to walk out of the casino with 500 pounds of silver.
Right.
So in the end, they had this another scheme of phony fill slips whenever because a table needed more money. They'd fill out a phony fill slip and send it through to take that money, drag that money in the end. At the Tropicana, Nick Civella's man out there, Joe Gasto, and Carl Thomas pretty much ran that casino. Okay. They had owners, but these two guys ran the casino, and they hired the right people to go in the count room. And so when they brought all the cash into the count room, then they just drag off so much and then count the rest of it.
And these Las Vegas casinos are sending money then back to Kansas City and Chicago and Milwaukee and Cleveland and all the other places.
There's two sets of, it really gets complicated. Two sets of skim coming, one from Tropicana just for Nick Civella, because he developed that all on his own.
Okay.
The Stardust, which is the one in the casino movie, Lefty Rosenthal or Ace Rothstein.
Right.
That was the bigger stream of money. It was like 100,000. We had about 40 grand a month coming from the Trop. They had about 100 or more every month coming from the Stardust, because they owned three other littler casinos.
Right.
And that money was all coming in the Stardust, and that was being divided up between Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Kansas City.
Okay.
Because they all conspired together and allowed the owner of that corporation to get a big $62 million Teamsters loan.
All right.
So then he allowed them to insert people into the count room that were, mob people.
Man, it just blows
and they
me
could
away.
Skim the money off and send it back.
They built a casino with pension money from the Teamsters. Right?
Yeah.
So they got a $60-some million from the pension. That's insane that even... Yeah, all the connections. It is complicated.
Yeah, it is.
It's interesting. It took a long time to get that all unraveled. But I think my impression had always been that American Mafia declined to the degree that they did, in part because of informants. That the sentences were so steep that people would rat everybody out, and they no longer kept that code of silence. But I learned from you quite a bit about the wires, the wiretapping, and putting a microphone in a restaurant at the booth they always sit at, and the payphone that they always use. That was actually a pretty big part of it too.
Here's the powerful weapon that basically destroyed the mob in the United States, or reduced it to what it is today.
Right.
And that's the RICO law, racketeer influenced and corrupt organizations, used in connection with wiretaps. Okay. Because with the RICO law, you don't just go after the one guy that's doing the talking. You go after the organization.
You go up the food chain.
Right. You go up the food chain, that's a good way to put it, and take everybody down. And you have these, they had more draconian sentencing also that came along at the same time after they developed, got a statute, or Omnibus Crime Control Act of 1968, established the wiretap, and sometime during those next few years they established this RICO law, and so you got, just charge people with racketeering.
Yeah.
Just getting together and talking about it. They don't like that. But, and the wiretaps are a big part of that. And out of that, you get a storyteller that says, I did this, and this for these guys. And, show me a picture. And they show them a picture of these guys together. And they say, that guy's, Joey Opa, he's the boss. And that guy next to him, that's Joey Lombardo. He's a capo. And that guy there, that's Vince Lano. He's a capo, too. And he has a crew. He has a Chinatown crew. And they do a lot of union racketeering, Right. So you get all that. It's a really complicated case. Yeah. But when they put it all together, which they started doing.
And each time one of those big cases comes through, it decapitates the leadership of the family. Right. It sends people to prison, and sometimes for the rest of their lives, and it reduces those mafia families, but they still exist.
Yeah.
So in what capacity do you see organized crime in Kansas City here in the last 20, 30, 40 years?
I'd say, after the 80s, that's when they all went to the penitentiary, 83, 84, were the trials. And since then, at the same time, the mafia, not only in Kansas City, but in every other city, lost any control over their Teamsters union, because the U.S. Department of Labor, after all the information that came out about these casino loans and these mob guys that were really influencing the Teamsters to then approve these loans, the pension fund to approve these loans, they put it into what they called a receivership, and appointed a trustee in every major city to oversee new elections. And then the U.S. Department of Labor really monitored those elections and watched for any mob influence in those elections. So they got all new people. So the mob basically lost the Teamsters Union. Yeah. And you know how big the Teamsters Union is? It's huge. And see, the Teamsters is a huge political weapon because at that point in time, labor unions still had a lot of influence over politicians, more than they do today. Because if you had Hoffa or you had Roy Lee Williams, you just go to him and say, we like this guy, we don't like that guy.
Right.
Give money to this guy. Give money to that guy. And so it's clean.
Pre- and post-election. You can have all kinds of influence.
Right. And it's clean money, It's Teamster money. It's not the mob money. It's Teamster money. So when they lost the Teamsters, they lost a lot of political power, and they lost all this steady stream of money coming from Las Vegas. And the bosses went to jail for a long time, the same time then they do the commission case in New York. And they take out all the bosses of the 5 families in New York City. Yeah. About the same time, they had these major mob investigations, RICO investigations, all over around the United States. And so that just, they're still there. You're always going to have that. It's kind of a culture in a way. It's in the culture.
But the Civella family in Kansas City, they get shipped away decade after decade.
Yeah. Their kids and grandkids are not,
not at the same level.
They never tried. And it didn't seem like they ever tried, and several of them didn't have it in them to try, and even the one I think maybe had it in him to try. By then, it's just it's too hard with wiretaps and there's just law enforcement's got so much more sophisticated, and the laws are more sophisticated, and they look at things like that, and they come down on you. Then it all got switched to the new organized crime, which is narcotics. But that wasn't the old line. La Cosa Nostra Mafia never really. Individuals did, but they as an organization, they never really got into narcotics.
Right. Not like the cartels from South and Central America. I mean, So let's shift gears. Did you have a plan for what you would do after you left law enforcement? I mean, did you know, okay, yes, I'm definitely going to go into this field or that field?
No, I didn't. I didn't really have a plan beyond being a cop until way late in my career. Some people do, I think. Maybe some people start businesses and always want to do something else. I never want to do anything else right back then, for sure. I was having too much fun. I left the intelligence unit, and it wasn't so much fun. I ended up back in patrol late in my career, working dog watch. So I'm talking to Daryl Chisholm, who was another sergeant. He's talking about a guy who became the chief of police, Daryl Forte. He said, Forte took the law school test. He said he did okay on it. I said, what? He said, he said he took the entrance exam. There's an exam called the LSAT that you have to take. He said, he took the LSAT, and he did. He scored it, and you can get practice ones. And he said he did pretty good on it. He's thinking about going to law school. So I'll never forget, Jared, that night it was like I was struck. I was blinded by the light. I had this physical, shudder went down through me. I thought, I could do that. Hell, if Forte can do that, I can do that. So the next week or two, I ran out to law school and asked them. They said, here's an entrance application, and here's a practice LSAT. So I took it home and looked at it. I thought, man, this is hard. But I took it and scored it, and I did. I think the medium, for anybody who gets accepted, the medium GPA is like a 3.5, and the LSAT was like a 155, and I scored a 150 on it. I thought, well,
that's pretty close.
I'm trying to finish off my undergrad now. It took me 30 years to get my undergrad degree, by the way. Overnight success after 30 years. But so, I was working on that, and I knew I was easily going to get a 3.5 because by this point in time, I was getting, 3.5 and 4.0 in every class I took.
Sure.
Because I wasn't out drinking and partying every night anymore. And so, I just kept kind of thinking about it. And over the next couple of years, went on days and did some kind of community policing stuff, which was boring. And the whole, intelligence, the whole wanting to chase the bad guys around and go after the big ones and all that was, I guess I matured beyond that or something. And I just started working on going to law school and thought, well, I'll just go to law school and see how that goes. So I went to law school as soon as I could retire at 25 and went to law school 3 years and I went straight through and then practiced law for the next 20 years as working for myself, just general, whatever I get my hands on. It wasn't too, as Professor Ochtenberg once told me, he said, Mr. Jenkins, he said, now when you get out of school, he said, nobody's going to come to you for any complex litigation. He said, but people are going to come to you and they want divorces and traffic tickets and all kinds of different things like that. And I thought, you're right. It kind of hurts my feelings, but you're right.
That's amazing. So how'd you come back to basically, you've become kind of a mafia historian. How did you come back to that?
Oh, I started doing these documentary films just as kind of a creative outlet.
Right.
And then, I had a lot of friends. We still got together periodically. About once every quarter, we all meet for lunch. And I don't know. I just always wanted to tell some of those stories.
Sure.
Especially the story, especially after the movie Casino came out, and then Nicholas Pileggi in his book Casino, I was walking through the plaza one day. I used to live down by there, and I was walking down the plaza, and some young policeman happened to see me, and he hollered. He said, "Hey, Sarge," he said, "I just read your name in a book." I said, "What do you mean my name in a book?" "Yeah," he said, "it's called Casino." So they've got them over there at Barnes and Noble. So I went to Barnes and Noble and looked in the back, and there's my name. So I flipped over, and I was whenever we served search warrants on all the mob bosses in Kansas City after the Skim investigation.
Right.
They sent one of the intelligence guys with each crew of FBI agents that was going to search the houses, and then had us wear uniforms. So we're still in the middle. There's still a mob war going on.
Right.
And so you don't want people to get mistaken about what's going on, especially on that night. And so it sent us, we just put on uniforms, checked out a marked car, and then went up and banged on the door and said, we got a search warrant, and then, just kind of step aside then and sat around with them all night just in case somebody came up and handle any kind of problems like that. And,
right.
And so that night, I was in Tuffy DeLuna's house. Carl Tuffy DeLuna was the underboss. And I was in his house. And 10 years later, a local newspaper reporter named Bill Norton wrote 10 years since we served these search warrants on St. Valentine's Day.
Okay.
So it was like the St. Valentine's Day massacre.
Right.
They served them in Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Las Vegas that same Valentine's Day. So it was like a Valentine for Tuffy or something like that. So he interviewed me and Bill Owsley and another detective that came over there later, Harold Nichols, about what was that night like. And, I gave him some quotes for his article. Right. So Pileggi, when he writes his book, in that section or that page or two about serving the search warrant on Tuffy DeLuna's house, he just basically took the quotes. He rewrote it in his own words, but took the quotes directly from Norton's article and put them in there. And that's why he had me in there.
That's how you got name dropped.
Yeah. Really. As a matter of fact, I tried to get him to be in my documentary, Gangland Wire. And the guy, I tell you what, dealing with these big time guys is hard because they don't have to do anything. And then the first time, we're all set to go, and he backs out. He said, I got to go to Hollywood.
Okay.
Got to go out to California. Okay. Last minute. A few months later, I make another run on him. He said, yeah, I'm good. So get it all set up. Well, this time, by then, I've contracted with a cameraman who's going to film all my interviews.
Okay.
And I wanted a little higher quality than I can do, lighting-wise and sound-wise. And so I buy him a ticket to go, and last minute, got to go out to Hollywood, can't make it. I just emailed him back. I said, well, I appreciate, and maybe someday. I said, but I'm not going to bother you again. I did make a run on him again to be on the podcast, just do a phone interview on the podcast. And he wouldn't do that.
Really? Really? So do you have any advice? Let's maybe think of officers who are thinking about their second chapter. Mm-hmm. They're thinking, okay, I'm not going to do this forever. So what am I going to do next? Do you have any words of wisdom for what to pursue and how to keep yourself busy and productive?
Oh, everybody's different. And even after I went to law school, at first I was trying to practice on my own, and it wasn't really. Luckily I had a couple of friends who'd been lawyers for a while, and they gave me some kind of cast off cases, and so I kind of getting a little bit of something going, and I thought, well, just find some kind of a job. I'm going to be kind of desirable with this legal law degree, and as one Professor Ochtenberg said, what do you want to be, a chief of police somewhere? You be a small town chief of police. And I don't know. I was tired of working for the government, though. I had a chance to be a legal a law clerk for a judge down there. But I told Judge Atwell, I said, I appreciate it, but I don't want to work for the government anymore.
Yeah.
I want to try to do something just on my own, see what I can do, all totally on my own. I mean, I just had that desire. So, if you got your pension coming in and you have that desire, I mean, it's a lot more work. I tell you what, I worked a whole lot harder in retirement than I ever did on the police department for the most part. Believe me, being a policeman is pretty easy compared to going out there and scuffling on your own.
Sink or swim on your own.
Sink or swim on your own, and don't have any hours. When you get off, you still got it in your head. So there's drawbacks to that, but yet there's a lot of freedom and a lot of sense of accomplishment to doing something totally on your own. So, but that's the time that you can do that.
Yeah.
When you got that pension coming in, that's the time to strike out on your own. If you ever had any desire to do that, give it a shot. Just don't invest all your savings into it. It'd be my advice on that one, but you didn't ask me for that.
Yeah.
But if there's something else, just get, when you retire, if you retire with the pension, you just got all this freedom.
Yeah.
So just, do something with that freedom.
Gary, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right. It was great to be here.
I want to thank Gary again. The vast amount of information at his fingertips is so impressive, and he was a real pleasure to talk to. If you're interested in the history of organized crime, including drug cartels and biker gangs, make sure that you tune in to the Gangland Wire podcast and go to Gary's website and watch his documentary movies. The link to his site will be in the show notes. And if you like episodes where I talk about crime and law enforcement history, can I recommend that you go back and listen to episode 13, Wheel Gun to Glock. That one was especially good, talking about the move from revolvers to semi-auto handguns. I guarantee you'll really like it. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain, we talk to a special guest, Mike the Cop. What kind of content would you want to produce? Would it be the skits, or would it be writing, or what would you want to do?
It's a really good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. So it makes me think it's really good. I'm used to getting a lot of very similar questions, and that one is something that no one has ever asked me. So that's a really good. It's probably mood dependent,
Okay, sure.
Or stylistically, if it's something that's really serious, that has a lot of weight to it, I tend to want to write it. And if it's something lighthearted, I would tend to want to make a sketch. If it has more gravity to it, I feel like at least I'm better at writing that stuff than I am making shorter videos about it.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like what you heard here, please share this episode with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening today, and as always, pray for peace in our city.